The Wicked movies have healed many fans despite the sad theme, but Gregory Maguire's original book, on which the films are based, is an entirely different beast. Wicked would have been a horror show if the movies were strictly based on the book, and the 13 ways the story has been watered down to be family-friendly is something insane you aren't prepared for. The Wicked movies are based on Gregory Maguire's 1995 novel, Wicked: The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, which is not suitable for children, despite the movie adaptation being ideal for kids. The book is filled with disturbing themes, but what's fascinating is understanding precisely what got changed and why these differences matter so much to the story. Starting with one of the biggest changes, Dr. Dillamond's fate is completely different in the book. In the movie, he gets fired and captured, but in the novel, he's brutally murdered. Glinda's chaperone, Amma Clutch, finds the body, and it drives her into a mental breakdown for the rest of her life. Many students saw his throat after it was slit and became traumatized. Elphaba suspects Madame Morrible is behind the horrific execution of Dr. Dillamond, with the whole thing covered up by the administration, which was never proven. This murder becomes the reason for everything Elphaba does afterward, fueling her rage against the wizard. But the movie softens this completely, removing the damaging impact of watching the beloved professor get brutally executed. However, it gets even darker with the Philosophy Club, which doesn't exist in the movies at all, as there's absolutely no way they could show it to the audience. In the book, some of the students visit this underground venue where the most disturbing and taboo acts imaginable take place. The Philosophy Club is a secret space that highlights the moral decay within Oz society as they engage in explicit, steamy performances, spicy acts between humans and animals, and the use of illegal substances. Bach and Fiyero witness these crazy acts, and it's Maguire's way of showing how corrupt and hypocritical the ruling class really is beneath their polished surface. The film replaces all of this with the wholesome Ozdust ballroom, where students sneak in for dances and fun, which is a more family-friendly setting. Speaking of things the movie completely erased, Elphaba herself is radically different in the book. The novel describes her as possibly being intersex, with ambiguous physical characteristics that the story never fully clarifies. She also has razor-sharp teeth that are so dangerous that adults are careful around her to avoid being bitten. Throughout Elphaba's childhood, she's described as violent and destructive, and someone genuinely frightening to be around. However, the movie shifted this perspective to present us with a different version of Elphaba, who's a sympathetic, misunderstood outcast who wants to do good in the world. But in the book, Elphaba is harsh, difficult to love, and not someone you'd necessarily want as your roommate, which makes her eventual friendship with Glinda even more complicated and interesting. Also, Fiyero's entire identity got stripped away for the screen adaptation. In the book, he's not just some carefree prince with a bad boy reputation. He's from the Arjiki tribe in the Vinkus, with ochre-colored skin and blue diamond markings painted on his face. His cultural heritage is a massive part of his character, representing colonized people who are viewed as uncivilized. The book uses Fiyero to explore themes of cultural erasure and colonization that mirror real-world oppression. However, the movie transforms him into Jonathan Bailey's charming, conventionally attractive prince who could fit into any society, totally erasing the discrimination he faced in the book. But we are yet to get to the most shocking part, even though it gets super interesting to see how the love triangle unfolds differently in the book compared to what we see on screen. In the movie, Fiyero and Glinda share a fascinating dynamic before he starts falling for Elphaba, creating this classic romantic tension. In the book, Fiyero and Glinda never have any romantic relationship at all. The real shock comes from learning that Fiyero was put in an arranged marriage at age 7 to a girl named Sarima to begin marital relations at 20. By the time he reunites with Elphaba years after graduating from Shiz, he's a father to 3 children, Urgi, Manek, and Nor. Despite having a family, he begins an affair with Elphaba that results in the birth of their son, Lier. This affair is described in explicit detail in the book, with graphic, steamy encounters that show a very different side of their relationship. Fiyero's wife, Sarima, and his entire family get erased from the movie because including them would make the story way too complicated and dark for the audience. The tragedy in the book takes a darker turn when Fiyero is captured and executed by the wizard's army, the Gale Force. His demise is brutal and devastating, sending Elphaba into such deep grief that she falls into a coma. And here's where it gets even more heartbreaking. During that coma, Elphaba gives birth to Lier without ever knowing she was pregnant or experiencing the birth. She never truly accepts Lier as her son, treating him with cold indifference throughout his childhood, except for rare moments of warmth. This creates a tragic cycle of neglect that continues for years. After Fiero's demise, Elphaba makes her way to Kiamoko Castle to seek forgiveness from Sarima, but Sarima refuses to even speak to her. Despite the affair that destroyed her marriage, Sarima still takes Elphaba and Lier into her home, revealing a complexity of character that is never explored in the movie. The story in the Wicked book gets even worse when the wizard's forces show up and execute Sarima, along with most of Fiero's family, leaving only his daughter Noor alive as a political prisoner. This massacre happens off-screen in the novel, adding layers of guilt and trauma to Elphaba's already tortured existence. None of these characters or their tragic fates appear in the movie at all, because the filmmakers wanted to keep the focus on the central friendship between Elphaba and Glinda, rather than dealing with the messy, complicated family situation. The ending is the most significant difference of all. In the musical and the movie, Elphaba fakes her demise using her knowledge of the water allergy rumor. She escapes with Fiero, who's been transformed into the Scarecrow, and they ride off together to live happily ever after while everyone believes they're no longer in existence. The movie's ending provides the audience with the satisfying conclusion they desire, but in the book, there's absolutely no happy ending whatsoever. When Dorothy throws water on Elphaba to put out the fire, it genuinely ends her life. Maguire describes Elphaba melting away mystically, revealing that the goddess of gifts reaches into the fire and water to pull out Elphaba's soul as she passes on. The book ends with the harsh reality that no one mourns the wicked. The citizens of Oz celebrate her demise, and Elphaba's legacy is tarnished by a reputation for malice. However, the musical and movie rewrite it to give the audience hope and closure. As if that's not wild enough, throughout the book, Elphaba becomes increasingly unstable and paranoid. She develops terrible insomnia that drives her to the edge of madness. She becomes convinced that Fiero somehow survived the execution and transformed into the Scarecrow. This delusion leads her to have her flying monkeys tear apart the Scarecrow's body, searching for any trace of Fiero inside, but they find nothing but straws. This descent into insanity shows how Elphaba is completely broken by trauma, guilt, and loss. But the movie never shows this level of psychological torture because it's too disturbing and doesn't fit into the family-friendly theme. Another massive change involves Elphaba's academic journey at Shiz University. In the book, she's a serious student with ambitions to study science, not sorcery. She takes a job as Dr. Dilliman's research assistant because she's passionate about the sciences. Her magical abilities are barely explored until Madame Morrible sees an opportunity to manipulate her for political purposes. But in the movie, Madame Morrible insists that Elphaba study sorcery after witnessing her accidental display of magical powers. This completely changes Elphaba's character from a self-directed intellectual in the book to someone whose path is chosen for her in the movies. Additionally, the political themes in the book dive deeper and darker than those explored in the movies. The wizard's regime doesn't just discriminate against animals, they actively commit massacres in the hinterlands, draining swamps to mine for rubies while murdering quadling people. Elphaba witnesses these atrocities firsthand as a child. The book shows how lies turn ordinary people into monsters, and how setting up minorities allows dictators to control power. These heavy political themes are significantly watered down in the movies, which focus more on friendship, personal growth, and defying expectations. But what's even more fascinating is how Boq's entire storyline was entirely reimagined for the screen. In the movie, we see Ethan Slater playing lovesick Boq, who can't get over his crush on Glinda, which eventually leads to his tragic transformation into the Tin Man. But in the book, Boq actually grows up and moves on from his infatuation. He and Glinda have several awkward but honest conversations about his feelings, with Elphaba forced to play third wheel as their chaperone during these meetings. Boq keeps trying to convince Glinda that he'd be happy just being friends if she'd give him a chance to spend time with her, even without romance. However, later in the book, Glinda undergoes a massive character transformation that alters her entire worldview, and Boq doesn't even recognize the person she's becoming. So, instead of pining after her forever, like in the movie, Bach accepts reality and moves on. Years later, Bach marries someone else entirely and has several children, living a completely normal life far removed from the tragic fate the movie gives him as the Tin Man. And then there's Nessaros's disability, which was altered for adaptation purposes. In the movie, we see her using a wheelchair as she is unable to walk. But in the book, Nessaros is born without arms, rather than without the use of her legs. Maguire implies this happened because their mother, Milena, was so traumatized by giving birth to green-skinned Elphaba that she took medication during her second pregnancy to prevent another child with unusual coloring, and those drugs caused Nessaros's disability instead.